Hey there! In this lecture, we're going to talk about Python as a programming language. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of Python and get our hands dirty with writing Python code, let's talk about programming. So what is programming? Simply put, program is instructing computers to do your tasks. Computers were invented at first because we couldn't solve a lot of complex computations. We had a lot of complex formulas that we needed to compute quickly and efficiently without the human error. Whenever we conducted a research, whenever we were experimenting, we needed a machine that could do our computations quickly and efficiently. So complex computations, maths, parallel computing was done by computers nowadays, and it is still being done, and computers are the core of our society. We rely on computers too much. So it's very important to understand why do we need to learn programming as in the first place. So let's talk about programs. So what is a program? A program is a sequence of instructions to execute a computation. So a programming language is a language of computers. Whenever we want to instruct computers to do our task, we need to communicate with them in a particular language, a language which they can understand. So why do we need to learn programming at all? If computers are so smart and they were built in the first place to do our task, we should have just invented such computers that could understand our native language. We could just instruct them to do our daily tasks. Simply put, it's because computers are dumb. Computers don't understand high-level abstract language. Like we speak, like humans, they do not understand these complex languages that we speak in our everyday lives. So that is mainly because computers are still machines, and they only understand zeros and ones. For that fact, we need to write certain programs, and that programs are converted into zeros and ones called the binary code, and that is fed into the computer, and the computer eventually acts on those instructions. Nowadays, we have Amazon Alexa, Google Assistant, and Siri, to which we just give them simple instructions and they act on them. But that's not exactly the case. Even though we give them simple instructions, on the back end there are certain programs that are written that understand those instructions, convert them from a high-level language to a low-level language called the machine code, which is just zeros and ones. And that is what computers actually understand. So the level of abstraction, or the level of, you can say, a pipeline, is that we write code, which is a program. So we feed that program to the computer, and that program is converted into a low-level bytecode. That bytecode is ultimately converted to zeros and ones that is fed to the memory of a computer, and then a computer acts on those zeros and ones and performs the particular tasks that is being conveyed in those instructions. So let's talk about the art of programming. The art of programming is basically problem solving. Usually, whenever we write instructions, we are dealing with whenever we want computers to solve our tasks, we are talking about a bigger complex problem. But whenever we solve the problem, we break it down into smaller sets of sub-problems, which are comparatively easier to solve. And programming is something we write instructions to solve these smaller problems, which ultimately constitute the bigger problem. And program consists of all these instructions that we write and ultimately solve those smaller problems, and then these smaller problems eventually combine to the bigger problem that we were trying to solve. For example, let's talk about the mathematical computation of a factorial. The factorial, although is a bigger operation, whenever we write code for it, we perform certain mathematical operations. We perform division and multiplication. So for that fact, we write code for multiplication and addition. So we have broken down our bigger problem into smaller problem, and we write instructions to solve those smaller problems. And those instructions ultimately constitute to become a program. So the question is, if you're not a programmer, can you code? This is an example of a Python code that instructs a robot to move from position X to position Y. This seems quite scary. As you can see, it's quite scary for anyone who has no idea of programming. But trust me on this, it's not that hard. Once you get started with it, it eventually starts making sense. So even though it looks tough, I can guarantee you that Python is one of the most simplest and easier to learn programming languages, and anyone, even though you do not have any programming experience, you can write a program and code in Python. So let's take an example. Let's write a program to sum two numbers. Right now, you do not know Python, you do not know how to code, but let's just forget about that. Let's just concentrate on the problem over here. We want to calculate the sum of two numbers. Obviously, whenever we want to calculate the sum, we're talking about addition. So we want to add two numbers. So first, we want to store those numbers into variables. X and Y will be our variables, and we need to perform addition, and this equality sign means that whatever the addition result is, it will be stored in another variable that is called the sum. So this will be the total, and this will be our first number, and this will be the addition operator, and this will be our second number. And you've just written Python code. These simple instructions, this one-line code, is the code for addition. And that is as simple as it gets. So congratulations, you've just written your first Python code, and as we move on, we will see that it becomes more easier and starts to make more sense when we write even complex codes.